In today's episode, we're diving into 5 people who were eaten alive during safari trips. From a lady consumed by a massive great white shark off the coast of South Africa, to a retired postmaster mauled by a black bear in the Canadian wilderness. But first, we begin deep in the Brazilian Pantanal, where a freelance photographer's pursuit of the perfect shot brought him face to face with the jungle's top ambush predator. It was August 3, 2014, in the heart of Brazil's Pantanal, where the receding floodwaters left behind slick mud banks and dense reeds. The air was heavy and still, the kind of silence that often comes before something breaks it. Out there in the thick brush, something was indeed watching and waiting. Doug Mallory was a 32-year-old former user experience designer from Boise, Idaho, who had abandoned computer monitors for something more primal. After years trapped behind a desk, he had walked away from his comfortable tech job to pursue his obsession, photographing jaguars in their natural habitat. This wasn't a National Geographic assignment or a well-funded conservation project. Doug financed his expeditions himself, using modest savings and credit cards to chase the perfect shot that would prove predators needed no embellishment, only honest documentation. By his 3rd week in Brazil, Doug had established a routine with his guide Rafael, a weathered local who knew the Pantanal's dangers intimately. They would set out at dawn, moving quietly through the maze of waterways and forest islands, searching for the telltale signs of jaguar presence. Tracks, scat, territorial markings. Doug often pushed the boundaries, straying from Raphael's side to get closer shots, tighter angles, more intimate portraits of the wilderness. Raphael repeatedly warned him about the particular female jaguar known to be hunting in the area with a dependent cub, a combination that made her exponentially more dangerous. The ranger station had posted clear warnings about this specific animal, aggressive female with dependent cub in the Corontsoro Bend area. Avoid travel on foot. Female jaguars with cubs represent one of nature's most formidable defensive forces. Maternal instincts override their natural caution around humans, transforming them into relentless protectors, willing to attack anything perceived as a threat to their offspring. Additionally, jaguars have the strongest bite of any big cat, over 1,500 psi, able to crush skulls or turtle shells in one bite. Built for ambush, they move silently through water and brush, striking with sudden lethal force. Doug had read the advisory, but brushed it off as overcautious bureaucracy. That morning, they found fresh paw prints in the mud, water still pooling in the tracks. Raphael signaled caution, but Doug, frustrated by weeks of near misses, moved in front of his guide. He didn't know the jaguar had doubled back hours ago and was already circling downwind. He wanted a ground-level photo framed by golden reeds, sun-dappled water behind. He crouched by the shore, camera up, then disaster struck. The jaguar exploded from cover. Raphael saw the blur hit Doug's back like a hammer. The cat drove him face first into the mud with a soundless pounce, its jaws clamping the base of his skull. There was a sickening crack, then a brief frantic thrashing, boots kicking, arms flailing as the jaguar dragged him backward by the head, spine bent unnaturally. In an instant, Doug was gone. One boot lay half submerged and the reeds were painted in long red smears. A wide drag trail vanished into the thicket, already closing behind him. The attack had been swift and efficient, exactly what millions of years of evolution had designed jaguars to deliver. Unlike the prolonged struggle seen with other predators, jaguar kills are typically instantaneous. Their powerful jaws crushing vital structures before prey can even comprehend what has happened. Raphael, unarmed and understanding the futility of pursuit into dense cover where a protective mother jaguar waited, radioed for help and maintained his vigil at the blood-soaked scene. Rangers arrived 2 hours later with rifles and machetes, following the drag marks for 30 yards before the trail vanished into a trampled clearing slick with blood and scattered fur. Despite extensive searches and camera traps placed throughout the area, Doug Mallory's remains were never recovered. The jaguar had done what jaguars do: efficiently eliminated a perceived threat to her cub and disposed of the evidence in the impenetrable maze of the Pantanal. His water-damaged camera equipment was eventually turned over to the American consulate in Quibah. The final photograph showing only a blurred frame of vegetation, time-stamped just minutes before the attack. A small memorial service was held in Boise, attended by former colleagues and local wildlife photographers who understood the risks Doug had chosen to accept. A Brazilian newspaper printed a brief notice: American tourist believed taken by jaguar near Pacone. No remains found. There were no sensational headlines, no calls for retribution against the jaguar. In the Pantanal, the predator had simply followed its instincts. As Doug's screams faded in the Brazilian wetlands, thousands of miles away off South Africa's coast, a marine biology student was about to learn that the ocean's apex predator shows no mercy. It was March 4th, 2015, during an ocean safari off the coast of Mossel Bay, South Africa. The Indian Ocean was cold and choppy, its gray surface rippling under a heavy sky. Swell slapped rhythmically against the dive boat's hull as it idled near Seal Island. Crew members later said something felt wrong that morning, like the water was holding something back. Haley Zhang, a 27-year-old marine biology graduate student from the University of British Columbia, had traveled halfway across the world for this dive. Her thesis focused on predator-prey behavior in coastal shark species, with a special emphasis on the breaching tactics of great white sharks. Unlike the thrill-seekers who typically filled these excursions, Haley wasn't chasing adrenaline. She was chasing field data. Professors described her as methodical and careful, someone who triple-checked gear and logged everything with precision. The float rig system used on these safari-style tours appealed to her research needs. It allowed surface-level observation of breaching behavior without full submersion in a cage, ideal for filming. She had covered the cost herself using a grant and her savings, arriving in South Africa 3 days earlier to finalize logistics. Her goal was to capture visual evidence of ambush breaches, rare events, but invaluable for her thesis defense. Haley entered the water at 10:20 a.m., wearing a half-dry suit and carrying a single GoPro mounted on a short pole. She was one of 4 guests using the float rig system that morning, tethered to the surface cage, but free to move within a limited radius. Witnesses later recalled that she seemed focused and professional, often turning her attention toward the open water rather than the bait box that typically drew tourist cameras. About 30 minutes into the dive, choppy conditions caused several snorkelers to drift from their positions. In that moment, Haley unclipped her tether to reposition her camera equipment, intending to reattach immediately. But she never got the chance. What Haley understood intellectually but perhaps didn't fully appreciate viscerally was the sheer predatory power she was studying. Great white sharks are apex predators refined by 400 million years of evolution, capable of reaching 20 feet in length and weighing over 4,000 pounds. Their breach attacks represent one of nature's most explosive displays of power, launching vertically from deep water at speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour, their massive jaws delivering a bite force of over 4,000 pounds per square inch. These attacks are designed to kill large marine mammals instantly, preventing any chance of escape or retaliation. The attack came without warning. A 14-foot great white erupted straight up from the murk in a vertical breach, its jaws already open. The impact was violent, an explosion of white water and blood as the shark hit Haley from below, folding her body like a rag doll. Its jaws clamped around her midsection with horrifying force, serrated teeth tearing straight through her wetsuit, skin, and ribs in one motion. The sound was a wet, crunching snap, followed by a scream that cut off almost immediately. For a brief second, both bodies hung in the air, hers limp, the shark thrashing, before crashing beneath the surface in a churn of red foam and scattered gear. There was no struggle, no chance for escape. The attack was over in seconds. Brutal, efficient, and final. Witnesses on the boat described a moment of stunned silence before screams erupted across the deck. The shark surfaced once more, Haley's lifeless form still gripped in its massive jaws, before disappearing forever into the depths. Despite an extensive 48-hour search involving patrol boats and dive teams, no trace of Haley Zhang was ever recovered except for her GoPro float, still blinking its recording light as it bobbed alone on the surface. The camera itself, along with whatever final footage it might have contained, vanished with her into the abyss. The dive company immediately suspended float rig operations and quietly updated their liability waivers. Haley's research materials were returned to the University of British Columbia, where her advisor requested that her unfinished thesis work be archived under her name, a small academic memorial to a promising young scientist whose quest for knowledge had led her into the jaws of the very predator she sought to understand. Her family held a private memorial service in Vancouver, declining all media requests. The chair of her department said simply that Haley had died doing what she believed in. South African waters still churned with the memory of Haley's final moments. But months earlier in Namibia's dusty plains, a mechanic would learn that even sedated predators can kill without warning. It was November 14, 2013. In the scorched Thornveld of Namibia's Okahanja district. A hot wind kicked up dust across the service road as the research team's backup truck idled behind a livestock trailer. What started as a standard wildlife management task was minutes away from turning into something no one would forget. Victor Njenga was a 29-year-old mechanic whose quiet demeanor masked a deep reliability that had earned him respect at the private game reserve near Okapuka. For nearly 4 years, he had worked in the motor pool, replacing axles damaged by rough terrain, rewiring trailer brakes, and refitting tires scorched by the brutal Namibian summer. 3 weeks before the incident, management had promoted him to vehicle escort trainee, a position that offered more field time and better pay. Though it came with new responsibilities, he was still learning to navigate. Victor wasn't reckless or inexperienced. He was methodical, learning through observation and careful attention to protocol. His primary duty was maintaining the secondary vehicle that followed research convoys, a dust-caked Land Cruiser equipped with mounted toolboxes and water barrels essential for extended field operations. He had never handled tranquilizer equipment or dart rifles, nor was he expected to. On collaring days like this one, his role was simple: stay back, observe, and assist with equipment loading when needed. That morning, the research team was relocating a subadult male lion for collar fitting and release. The 3-year-old cat had been tranquilized near a boundary fence and transported in a specialized crate designed for safe handling of large predators. The crate was positioned with its rear gate facing a narrow fire break road, standard procedure intended to limit the animal's escape options should something go wrong. As the team prepared for the collaring procedure, they noticed the lion beginning to show signs of consciousness. Its head twitched, powerful hind legs flexed against the crate walls, and its breathing pattern changed from the deep, regular rhythm of full sedation to the irregular gasps of an animal fighting its way back to awareness. The collar hadn't been fitted yet, creating a critical decision point for the research team. A senior veterinarian made the call to attempt repositioning the lion while it was still manageable, ordering the rear gate to be opened slowly with the metal barrier serving as protection. Victor stood off to the side of the trailer, holding a hydraulic jack intended for lifting the crate's rear axle, his attention focused on the left tire that had sunk slightly into the soft sand. They had no idea about the sequence that was about to unfold. African lions are the continent's second largest carnivores, with adult males capable of weighing over 400 pounds of pure muscle and bone-crushing strength. Their massive paws can shatter human bones with a single swipe, while their jaws deliver a bite force exceeding 650 pounds per square inch. Most critically, lions emerging from sedation are unpredictable and dangerous. The drugs used in field operations can wear off at different rates depending on the animal's metabolism, stress levels, and age, creating windows of partial consciousness where the animal retains its lethal capabilities while lacking normal behavioral inhibitions. What happened next occurred with the terrifying speed that characterizes all big cat attacks. The moment the gate cracked open, the lion exploded outward with shocking violence. This wasn't the sluggish emergence of a heavily sedated animal. This was 400 pounds of apex predator launching itself into action with deadly precision. The cat stumbled once on stiff legs, then regained its coordination in a blur of golden muscle and extended claws. The research team scattered in panic. 2 members dove behind the main vehicle, another threw himself back into the crate. But Victor hesitated, perhaps interpreting the initial stumble as a sign the lion was still heavily impaired. That moment of hesitation cost him his life. The lion covered the 20-foot distance in 3 powerful bounds, striking Victor mid-turn as he finally began to run. The impact knocked him flat onto the sand, the cat's massive weight driving him into the ground with bone-crushing force. Witnesses later described the attack as eerily silent. No roaring, no extended struggle, just the sickening sound of claws tearing through fabric and flesh as the lion established its grip. The predator's killing technique was textbook efficient. Lions typically kill large prey by clamping their powerful jaws around the throat, cutting off air supply while their weight and claws prevent escape. Victor suffered catastrophic injuries to his neck and shoulder as the lion's 4-inch canine teeth punctured vital structures, his cervical vertebrae dislocating under the tremendous pressure. 2 armed staff members fired warning shots into the air, but the lion, operating on pure predatory instinct, ignored the noise. Only a direct shot to the flank finally caused the cat to release its grip and stagger away from Victor's motionless form. By then, it was far too late. Victor's neck had been shredded, his jawbone exposed, and blood was rapidly soaking into the red Namibian earth beneath them. When Ministry of Environment officials arrived that afternoon following the staff's call an hour ago, the scene had been cordoned off and sanitized. The lion's carcass was removed for necropsy to determine sedation levels and whether any adverse reaction had contributed to the tragedy. Victor's body was placed in a black plastic bag and transported back to Windhoek, where forensics would officially list the cause of death as cervical dislocation and catastrophic blood loss from throat trauma. Victor Njenga's funeral was held 3 days later in Katatura Township, a small private affair attended only by family, a few co-workers, and neighbors who had known him since childhood. The manager sent a sealed letter and 2 months severance pay to the family, while a brief segment aired on local Oshawambo language radio. No English language press covered the incident. Weeks before the safari crew watched a lion tear through Victor, deep in the Canadian wilderness, a man leaned too far over a railing and was dragged screaming into the trees by something just as lethal. It was October 12, 2013 in Prince Albert National Park. A cold wind moved across Waskesiu Lake as tourists walked the boardwalk, leaves falling around them. In the brush just beyond the path, something watched in silence. Dan Armstrong was a 55-year-old recently retired postmaster from Winnipeg who had traded 3 decades behind the postal counter for the quiet pursuit of wildlife photography. He wasn't a rugged outdoorsman by any measure, but he harbored a genuine passion for capturing elk in their natural habitat, particularly during the misty morning hours when light and shadow created perfect photographic conditions. He and his wife Janine had booked a modest wilderness safari package through a regional travel company, complete with cabin accommodations, park passes, and loosely guided hiking schedules. It was meant to be their final autumn adventure before winter's harsh grip settled over the Canadian wilderness. Dan was carrying quality binoculars, a modest DSLR camera, and printed copies of the park's recommended trail maps. That morning, after breakfast in town, they had planned to walk the South Bay Boardwalk loop before lunch, hoping to photograph elk herds that typically move near the lake shore during colder months. Several locals had mentioned increased bear activity in recent weeks, But Dan assumed black bears would be preparing for hibernation, sluggish, reclusive, and unlikely to pose any real threat. But Dan didn't fully understand the desperate state of predators during poor foraging seasons. Black bears, while generally smaller and more timid than their grizzly cousins, can become extremely dangerous when unable to accumulate sufficient fat reserves before winter hibernation. Males who fail to reach adequate body weight may abandon their natural caution around humans, becoming aggressive scavengers willing to take extraordinary risks for food. These bears often exhibit erratic behavior, breaking into campsites, raiding garbage containers, and approaching humans with a boldness that contradicts their species' typical wariness. Earlier that week, rangers warned of a lone male black bear acting aggressively near the South Bay boardwalk, destroying trash bins and refusing to back off when challenged. Signs were posted and staff were told to alert hikers, but no rangers were on site that morning, and the warnings weren't mentioned in tour briefings. The trail passed through marshland and into dense forest, wooden rails marking its edge. The woods were quiet, footsteps muffled by damp leaves. Light filtered through the canopy in shifting patches, enough to hide something large. Janine trailed a few steps behind her husband, pointing out squirrel nests and old claw marks on the birch trees, signs that should have stopped them from continuing. About halfway through the loop, they heard rustling in the underbrush, the sharp crack of dry branches breaking in a thicket just beyond the guardrail. Dan slowed his pace and motioned for Janine to stop, leaning against the wooden barrier as he raised his camera. Assuming the movement indicated elk, he stepped closer to the rail and adjusted his zoom lens. Janine later recalled him whispering that there's something there as he focused his camera on the dense vegetation. Then, in an instant, a blur of black fur and muscle exploded from the undergrowth with terrifying speed. The bear charged directly at the guardrail, hitting it chest first with such force that the wooden barrier splintered and collapsed, sending Dan tumbling backward onto the forest floor. According to Janine, he landed hard on his shoulder, rolled once, and attempted to crawl away, but the bear was already upon him. Black bears usually weigh 200 to 400 pounds, but their stocky build gives them powerful striking force. This bear, desperate and hungry, showed no hesitation. It wasn't acting defensively. It bit into Dan's upper back and shoulder, then pinned him with both massive forepaws. Its claws, designed for climbing trees, easily capable of tearing through human flesh and bone. Janine screamed as the bear reared up and crashed down on her husband, ribs cracking on impact. It bit into the base of his neck, aiming for spine and arteries. Hikers shouted and threw rocks, one charged with a branch, but the bear didn't flinch. The attack was both brutal and efficient. After establishing its killing grip, the bear dragged Dan's body several feet into the underbrush before disappearing completely into the dense forest, hauling its victim by the midsection with the casual strength of an apex predator claiming its prize. Janine, pulled to safety by another hiker, was in severe shock while another called for help. Rangers arrived 25 minutes later. Despite extensive searches involving tracking dogs and aerial support, the bear was never located, having either retreated deeper into the wilderness or gone to ground in a den site to hibernate. Dan Armstrong's remains were recovered in fragments 4 days later by a ranger patrol near a suspected den site several miles from the attack location. Forensic teams confirmed the identity through dental records, and the family requested no autopsy be performed. A closed casket service was held in Winnipeg the following week, attended by relatives and a handful of retired postal workers who remembered Dan's quiet dedication and gentle nature. Park officials quietly reviewed trail safety procedures and reinforced several guardrails. The bear, presumed to be the same rogue male that had been exhibiting aggressive behavior, was never captured or killed. No additional attacks occurred in the area that season, and the boardwalk remains open to this day. This lakeside walk ended in a sudden blur of fur and screams. While deep in the Florida Everglades, a young man leaned too far over dark water and fed himself to something far older and far less forgiving. It was May 30th, 2016, the Florida sun beating down mercilessly on the murky waters of Everglades National Park. The holiday crowds had begun to thin as temperatures soared, but the airboat tours continued their regular schedule, ferrying tourists through the ancient waterways where danger lurked just beneath the deceptively calm surface. Rico Mendez was a 26-year-old transmission specialist from Hialeah, Florida, known among his co-workers for his boisterous laugh and reflexive disregard for posted warnings. This spontaneous trip to the Everglades with two friends from the garage was nothing more than a casual day off, an opportunity for laughs and social media content. To Rico, the Everglades weren't a wild ecosystem demanding respect. They were simply background scenery for good selfies and bigger stories to tell later. The group boarded the airboat around 11:15 a.m., just as the sun began to hammer down with full force. Rico immediately made jokes about how gators were just slow swamp dogs, dismissing the very real danger that surrounded them. As their boat glided through shallow channels lined with cypress and sawgrass, the guide cut their engine near a slough, a slow-moving section of open water where alligators often congregate. American alligators have remained largely unchanged for over 200 million years. They can reach 13 feet in length, weigh up to 1,000 pounds, and deliver a bite force of 2,125 psi, enough to crush bone. As ambush predators, they launch from the water at over 20 miles per hour and use a violent death roll to tear prey apart. The guide gave his usual warning: don't feed the wildlife or lean over the rails. The animals weren't pets. They linked boats to food and could get aggressive. Rico, as always, ignored it. Despite the explicit instructions, Rico began tossing strips of beef jerky into the water while his friends laughed and recorded video. A dark shape appeared, hovering just feet from the boat's edge. A massive alligator, roughly 12 feet long, rose slowly from the depths, its prehistoric eyes fixed on the source of food. The guide shouted frantically for Rico to stop, but Rico was already squatting near the edge with his phone, grinning as he gestured for someone to take his picture. Then disaster struck with terrifying swiftness. Rico's foot slipped on the damp aluminum deck, still slick from spray. He pitched forward, arms first, then chest, into the murky water with a loud splash. The alligator reacted with the lightning-fast reflexes of a predator that had perfected its hunting technique over millions of years. The massive reptile lunged with jaws wide, clamping around Rico's torso with a brutal snap that fractured ribs instantly. Blood erupted into the water as Rico's friends desperately lunged for his legs, managing to grab his jeans briefly before the gator initiated its signature death roll. The violent spinning motion broke their grip immediately, and Rico disappeared beneath the surface in a churning vortex of blood and foam. Screams erupted across the airboat as the guide radioed for emergency response. More blood surfaced briefly, then the water returned to its deceptive calm, as if nothing had happened. Park rangers arrived within the hour, accompanied by officers from Florida Fish and Wildlife. Search divers equipped with protective gear and rifles combed the area with extreme caution. 3 hours later, they located Rico's remains near a submerged log. His body had been catastrophically damaged, missing the right arm and most of the left leg. Drag marks in the silt suggested the alligator had partially cached him for later consumption, a natural behavior that demonstrates these predators' methodical approach to feeding. The responsible alligator, a large male, was captured that evening and euthanized the following morning. Officials classified the incident as a food-conditioned fatality, a tragic but predictable result of human interference with natural predator behavior. Rico's funeral took place 5 days later at St. Monica Parish in Hialeah. The service was brief and sparsely attended. The airboat company faced no charges, but implemented new safety protocols and upgraded warning signage. A brief segment aired on local evening news under Holiday Tragedy, featuring stock alligator footage and images of the airboat dock. By the weekend, the story had been forgotten, replaced by other news. Thanks for watching. If today's tragedies piqued your interest, the next video features more deadly animals. See you there.